Every single breath you just took was the result of an astonishingly precise biological machine, one that's been running nonstop since the moment you were born. The respiratory system isn't just the lungs, it's a complete architecture, a network of organs and structures built for one job: gas exchange. Today, we're going to trace the entire journey of a single breath, from the moment air touches your nostrils to the microscopic instant oxygen slips into your bloodstream. Think of this as a 3-act story. Act 1 is structure, the conducting network that warms, filters, and transports air. Act 2 is mechanics, the bellows system of ribs, muscles, and pressure that actually moves that air. And Act 3 is physiology, the vital exchange happening in tiny sacs called alveoli, where oxygen and carbon dioxide swap places. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how your body performs this 12 to 15 times a minute miracle completely automatically, without you ever having to think about it. Let's start at the very beginning, the nose.
Air's journey begins at the nose, the primary entry point of the entire respiratory tract. Internally, the nasal cavity is split into 2 passages by a wall called the septum, built some hyaline cartilage at the front. The roof of this cavity is formed by the ethmoid bone, the floor by the roof of your mouth, and the side walls by the maxilla bone. But the nose isn't just a hole for air to pass through. It's a sophisticated conditioning chamber. As air rushes in, 3 things happen almost instantly. First, warming. The mucosal lining is incredibly rich in blood vessels, and that blood heats incoming air to near body temperature. Second, filtering. Tiny hairs just inside your nostrils trap larger airborne particles before they ever reach your lungs. And third, humidification. As air travels over the moist mucosal surface, it absorbs water vapor, becoming fully saturated. By the time air leaves your nose, it's been warmed, cleaned, and moistened, perfectly prepared for the delicate tissue deeper inside your airway. Next, air enters the pharynx, commonly known as the throat. This muscular tube is about 12 to 14 centimeters long, stretching from the base of your skull down to the 6th vertebra in your neck. What makes the pharynx unique is that it's a shared passageway. Both air and food travel through it, which is why its structure is divided into 3 distinct regions. The nasopharynx sits behind the nose. Below that is the oropharynx, located behind the mouth. And finally, the laryngopharynx, which connects down toward both the esophagus and the larynx. Structurally, the pharynx is built from 3 layers: a mucous membrane lining, fibrous tissue, and smooth muscle, giving it both flexibility and strength. But its job goes beyond simply being a tunnel. The pharynx continues the warming and humidifying process started in the nose, contains lymphatic tissue that produces antibodies for immune defense, houses the auditory tube connecting to your middle ear, and even acts as a resonating chamber that helps shape the sound of your voice. At the bottom of the pharynx sits the larynx, your voice box, positioned at the level of the 3rd through 6th cervical vertebrae. The larynx is built from several irregularly shaped cartilages connected by ligaments and membranes. The largest is the thyroid cartilage, 2 fused flat plates of hyaline cartilage that form the visible bump known as the Adam's apple. Below it sits the cricoid cartilage, a complete ring providing structural support. Sitting on top of the cricoid are 2 small pyramid-shaped arytenoid cartilages, which anchor the vocal cords and control their tension. And crowning the structure is the epiglottis, a leaf-shaped flap made of elastic fibrocartilage, completely different from the rigid hyaline cartilage elsewhere in the larynx. This flexibility is essential because the epiglottis has one critical, life-saving job. During swallowing, the entire larynx physically lifts upward, and the hinged epiglottis folds down to seal the airway. This guard mechanism prevents food and liquid from entering your trachea, engaging every single time you swallow, automatically thousands of times throughout your life. Continuing downward, air now enters the trachea, commonly called the windpipe. It's a relatively short structure, just 10 to 11 centimeters long, extending from the larynx down to roughly the 5th thoracic vertebra, where it splits into 2 branches. Structurally, the trachea is a masterpiece of biomechanical design. Its wall contains 3 tissue layers: fibrous and elastic tissue, smooth muscle, and a ciliated columnar epithelium lining. But its most recognizable feature is something else entirely: between 16 and 20 C-shaped rings of cartilage. Notice that word, C-shaped, not a complete circle. This is intentional. The rigid cartilage at the front and sides prevents the trachea from collapsing every time you inhale, maintaining an open airway under pressure. But the open gap at the back is equally important. It allows the esophagus, which sits directly behind the trachea, to expand outward when you swallow food. This is form perfectly dictating function. The trachea also runs a powerful defense system, the mucociliary escalator, where tiny hair-like cilia constantly sweep trapped particles upward and out, alongside the cough reflex, which forcefully ejects anything that slips past. At the base of the trachea, around the carina at the 5th thoracic vertebra, the airway splits into the right and left primary bronchi, and from here, the architecture becomes dramatically asymmetrical. The right bronchus is wider, shorter at just 2.5 centimeters, and more vertically angled. It divides into 3 branches, one supplying each of the right lung's 3 lobes. The left bronchus, by contrast, is narrower and longer at 5 centimeters, dividing into only 2 branches for the left lung's 2 lobes. This asymmetry actually has real-world medical significance. Because the right bronchus is wider and more vertical, inhaled foreign objects are statistically more likely to lodge there. From these primary bronchi, the airway keeps branching into secondary or lobar bronchi, then tertiary or segmental bronchi, and finally into progressively smaller bronchioles. As this branching continues, something subtle happens at the cellular level. The ciliated columnar mucous membrane gradually transitions into non-ciliated cuboidal cells. These conducting airways remain too thick-walled to allow gas exchange. Their only job is transportation, getting air deeper into the lung until it reaches its ultimate destination. Now we arrive at the lungs themselves, 2 cone-shaped organs, each weighing between 600 and 700 grams and measuring 20 to 24 centimeters in length. Each lung has a rounded apex, rising into the root of the neck, and a concave, semilunar base that rests directly on the diaphragm. But the right and left lungs are not mirror images of each other. The right lung is larger and contains 3 lobes: superior, middle, and inferior, separated by 2 fissures, an oblique fissure and a horizontal fissure. Its larger size and specific shape accommodate the higher position of the right side of the diaphragm. The left lung is smaller, with only 2 lobes, superior and inferior, separated by a single oblique fissure. Why smaller? Because of a feature called the cardiac notch, a deep impression carved into the medial surface of the left lung, making space for your heart, which sits slightly left of center in your chest. This asymmetry isn't a flaw, it's precise anatomical compromise, fitting 2 large gas exchange organs and a beating heart into one confined thoracic space. Surrounding each lung is a remarkable double membrane system called the pleura, and understanding it is key to understanding how breathing actually works. There are 2 layers. The visceral pleura is adhered directly to the lung tissue itself, even dipping down into the fissures between lobes. The parietal pleura lines the inside of the chest wall and the upper surface of the diaphragm. Between these 2 layers lies the pleural cavity, an incredibly thin space containing a small film of serous fluid, secreted by epithelial cells of the membrane. This fluid serves 2 essential functions. Horizontally, it acts as a lubricant, letting the 2 pleural layers glide frictionlessly across each other during every breath. But vertically, it does something far more important. It creates intense surface tension, essentially gluing the lungs to the chest wall through cohesive force. This vacuum-like seal is what physically pulls the lungs outward and prevents them from collapsing whenever the chest cavity expands. Without this pleural seal, your lungs would simply deflate like a punctured balloon. None of this air movement happens passively. It requires two powerful muscular systems working in perfect coordination. First, the diaphragm, a dome-shaped muscular floor separating your thoracic and abdominal cavities. When it contracts, its central tendon is pulled downward to roughly the 9th thoracic vertebra level, vertically lengthening the thoracic cavity and decreasing internal pressure. Second, the intercostal muscles, 11 pairs occupying the spaces between your 12 ribs, arranged in external and internal layers. Because your first rib is anatomically fixed in place, when these muscles contract, they pull all the lower ribs upward and outward, like opening a bucket handle, circumferentially expanding the entire thoracic cavity. Together, the diaphragm lengthens the chest vertically while the intercostals widen it horizontally. This dual-action expansion in every direction simultaneously is what creates the pressure drop necessary to draw air deep into your lungs, a perfectly synchronized muscular engine running roughly 12 to 15 times every single minute of your life. Let's put it all together into one complete breathing cycle, which unfolds in two distinct phases. Inspiration is active. It requires energy and takes about 2 seconds. The diaphragm and intercostal muscles contract simultaneously. The thoracic cavity's capacity increases in all directions, and the parietal pleura pulls the visceral pleura outward along with it. This drops intrapulmonary pressure below atmospheric pressure, and air rushes in to equalize that gradient, drawn naturally into the lungs. Expiration, by contrast, is passive, requiring no energy expenditure at all. The muscles simply relax. The thoracic volume decreases through natural elastic recoil, and because intrapulmonary pressure now exceeds atmospheric pressure, air is pushed back out. Throughout this entire cycle, the intact, sealed pleura prevents any total lung collapse. On average, each cycle moves about 500 milliliters of air, known as tidal volume, and this entire active-passive rhythm repeats 12 to 15 times every minute, completely automatically, controlled by the respiratory center in your brainstem's medulla oblongata. Now we shrink down to the microscopic finish line of this entire journey. Terminal bronchioles subdivide further into alveolar ducts, which open into clusters of tiny air sacs called alveoli. The numbers here are staggering. The average adult lung contains roughly 150 million alveoli, all supported by a loose, elastic connective tissue network that allows them to expand and recoil with every breath. What makes gas exchange possible here is pure microscopic engineering. The walls of both the alveoli and the surrounding capillaries are extraordinarily thin, strictly just one single cell thick on each side. This creates what's called the air-blood barrier, an interface so thin that oxygen and carbon dioxide molecules can essentially pass straight through with almost no resistance. If you spread out all the alveoli in a typical adult's lungs, their combined surface area would cover roughly half a tennis court, an enormous gas exchange surface, compressed into a structure that fits inside your chest. Gas exchange in your body actually happens in two completely separate locations, working through one shared principle: passive diffusion along a concentration gradient. The first site is external respiration, occurring across the respiratory membrane in your lungs. Oxygen, present in high concentration inside the alveoli, diffuses down its gradient into the lower oxygen venous blood. Simultaneously, carbon dioxide, high in concentration in that venous blood, diffuses the opposite direction, into the alveoli, ready to be exhaled. The second site is internal respiration, happening across capillary membranes deep in your metabolizing tissues, like your muscles. Here, the gradient reverses. Oxygen-saturated blood arrives with high oxygen concentration and diffuses into oxygen-depleted tissue cells. Meanwhile, carbon dioxide, a waste product generated by your cells, diffuses from that tissue into the bloodstream to be carried back to the lungs and exhaled. No pumps, no active transport, just pure physics. Molecules naturally moving from areas of high concentration to low concentration, sustaining every cell in your body. Understanding healthy anatomy also reveals exactly what goes wrong during disease. Take pneumonia as a clear example. In a healthy alveolus, you have a clear, air-filled sac with paper-thin walls, the perfect interface for that gradient-driven gas exchange we just described. But during pneumonia, the airway's natural defense mechanisms, filtering, the mucociliary escalator, and immune cells called macrophages become overwhelmed by infection. Fluid begins accumulating inside the alveoli themselves. This isn't just uncomfortable, it's structurally catastrophic. That fluid physically widens the air-blood barrier, destroying the paper-thin, one-cell-thick interface that oxygen needs to pass through. The functional surface area for gas exchange shrinks dramatically, and oxygen diffusion essentially halts in the affected regions. This is a perfect demonstration of a core biological principle. Form dictates function. Change the structure, even slightly, and the entire physiological process built on top of it breaks down, which is precisely why pneumonia causes the breathlessness and low blood oxygen levels associated with the disease. So, let's trace that complete journey one final time. Atmospheric air enters through the structural pathway, the nose, pharynx, larynx, and trachea. Warmed, filtered, and humidified by C-shaped rings and mucosal tissue, then guided deep into the lungs through the branching bronchial tree. From there, the mechanical engine takes over, the diaphragm and intercostal muscles contracting together, the sealed pleura creating the vacuum force that physically pulls air downward into the lungs. And finally, physiology completes the mission. Millions of microscopic, one-cell-thick alveoli executing the ultimate gas exchange, fueled by nothing more than simple passive pressure gradients. Every single one of these systems, skeletal architecture, muscular dynamics, and cellular diffusion, must work in seamless, uninterrupted coordination. And this entire orchestrated sequence repeats roughly every 2 seconds for every moment of your entire life, sustaining what we simply call the engine of life. That's the complete blueprint of respiration: structure, mechanics, and physiology working as one unbroken chain.